Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Brubaker. Welcome to our panel this afternoon. Really, really happy to have you here. I'm going to start with quick introductions, but just know that we have full bios for all of our panelists that are here in front of us that are going to be populating the chat. So first of all, I want to introduce Syrus Marcus Ware. Syrus is artist, activist, core member of Black Lives Matter, and a current PhD candidate. Would you say, Syrus? Is that about right?
Yes, I'm ABD.
Ooh, okay, coming to the home stretch then. Awesome. Lesley Wood is a scholar and activist from York University. Do you want to wave there, Lesley? Great. And of course, we have Olivia Chow, who is an activist, former MP, and I like to call an urban champion. Hi, Olivia. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so I just want to point out that all of these folks here are lifers in the world of civic activism, and they are change leaders, and we are so grateful to have you here today. My name is Christine Brubaker. As I said, I'm a theater artist, and I'm coming to you today from Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. I'm a dual citizen between Calgary and Toronto. That's what I like to call it. Calgary is also known as Mohkinstsis, and Mohkinstsis is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Pekainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Nakota Nations, and Métis Nation Region 3. So, Henry G20, I hope some of you had a chance to tune in just before this. This is a piece that I started many years ago in 2014. It's my creative brainchild, but I would be lying to say that I do this on my own. Of course, no one ever does. So I want to make a quick shout out to my collaborators, actor, producer Netta Rose, co-writer Constantine Anastasakis. The audio sneak peek was sound designed by Nicolas Rodriguez. And we have an incredible cast with Khadija, Roberts Abdullah, Anand Rajram, Aviva, Amar Ostroff, Kit Bolter, many others. You can follow a link to www.henryg20.com and it'll give you our full cast of 13 principals and another 15 chorus members. So check it out. Again, I started this project in 2014 when I was an assistant director at the Stratford Festival. We were only a few years out from the very abrupt and violent ending of the Occupy movement. Black Lives Matter was beginning to emerge in the collective consciousness after the murder of Trayvon Martin. We were 3 years out from the G20 protests and the largest mass arrest in Canadian history, where 1,100 people were arrested and detained in a 6-day period. I've been thinking deeply about our relationship to conflict and violence as Canadians, and in particular, our relationship to policing and protesting. And I was bewildered and disturbed that so many of these moments seemed to evaporate in public consciousness. They were victims of the lightning fast news cycle. And I really wanted to talk about war on the streets of Toronto in our time. And the G20 had epic battles right on our streets. I wanted to remind people that there was a lot more to the G20 story than just burning police cars. It was a story of sanctioned police violence, ignorance in the police force about charter rights, and a legal system and government that favors those with money and access. This has been a project 6 years in the making. It was originally intended to premiere on the 10-year anniversary of the G20 protests, which happens to be, well, basically right now into next week. But, well, it's COVID, so, you know. So here we are, 10 years later. I imagine each of you panelists can clearly recollect where you were 10 years ago. You were probably very busy organizing, planning, responding, working very hard, a lot of late nights, I imagine. Fences were going up in the downtown. Cops were being imported into the city from all over the place. Our streets turning into a war zone. Massive clashes, the infamous kettlings, tear gas, rubber bullets, legal detentions. We know the story. And now here we are 10 years later. The violent murder of George Floyd, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, the unanswered questions around the death of Toronto's Regis Korchinski-Paquette, and too many others. These deaths at the hands of the police have reignited an outrage about structural and systemic anti-Black racism. The term white supremacy is now in our vernacular. Even my conservative voting family members understand what BIPOC stands for. As well, we've been witnessing massive sustained protests in Hong Kong, now over a year. The resistance and blocking of the rail lines in support of the Wet'suwet'en, and all within the bewildering and inequitable context of COVID-19. So there is a lot going on, and well, I don't know about you, but it feels to me like a revolution, and I really hope it is. So on to you, Syrus. From your position as a core team member of Black Lives Matter, but also a long-time artist, activist who is using art to change mindsets, challenge systemic oppression, what is different for you this time? Is it different this time? And what do you think is changing, and what continues to change?
Well, first of all, I think, the protest movement and activist movement and the way that we organized changed rapidly in the last 10 years with the advent of online spaces and online activism. So already our activism was going through a change and a shift. Right now, we are witnessing a global pandemic of COVID-19, and we saw this unprecedented move where as a disabled person, I found this so surprising, this unprecedented move where a whole bunch of people said, actually, we're going to stay inside to make sure that we keep disabled people safe, that we keep elders safe. And so we all collectively quarantined to make sure that those of us who were most likely to get the virus were kept safer. I mean, it was this practice of collective care and mutual aid that was sort of unprecedented. We're also witnessing, because of COVID-19, because of all of the things that you've mentioned, this process and this period of systems collapse. We're in a period of systems collapse right now, in that panarchy cycle of systems change. We're in the period where we're just about to begin something new, something different is coming. We're at the end of capitalism, late capital, capitalism is breathing and heaving its dying breath before us. May it be, may it be, may it be. And of course, what happened over COVID and during this period of being quarantined is that people had a chance, not everybody, but some people had a chance to rest, perhaps for the first time in years, because capitalism disavows rest. It doesn't allow us to ever have pause, so there was this opportunity to rest and re-engage and to sort of imagine what freer could look like. We were all asked, what do we want in this post-COVID world? What do we want it to look like? And people started imagining and dreaming the possibilities. I think that, absolutely right now, we're witnessing a shift of the center of where organizing and activism is happening. We're seeing, organizing leadership coming from disabled and sick people, people who are already experts in organizing, under, particular health conditions, under situations where we might not be able to gather. This is something that is already, the expertise already lives within disabled communities. I mean, Octavia Butler told us that change was going to be constant, that all that we touched, that we changed, and all that we changed us, and absolutely she's true. Change has kept us on our toes at this moment. And I think right now, more than ever, we need to be touching change in the way that she recommends, like actually shaping what our activisms look like and what we want them to look like going forward. We want to make sure that it includes and centers the voices of Black trans women. We want to make sure that Black people who are mad and disabled are centered in our organizing, that we're grounding our work in support of Indigenous resurgence. Yeah, I think you're right. We are witnessing a revolutionary moment. It is here. It is now. And we can't let them distract us or get us, sort of placated with ideas of reform or small change. I think right now, what's different is that people are engaged and we're pushing for huge things now. I realize that. But there are also things that are really simple to grasp when you break them down to their smallest elements. Stop caging people. Recognizing that the police are not keeping us safer or more secure, recognizing that for Black people, for Black mad people, we deserve to live and we deserve to be free. So, this is not a one-time event. This is an ongoing process. And I think right now we're seeing possibility open up in ways that we've never seen before. And I'm really excited for it.
Oh, that is it's really, really exciting, because it's easy to get weighed down. It's easy to get kind of caught in the knot, but they're going to keep the vision going forward. That's really inspiring. Thank you, Syrus. Lesley, you recently, just this week, I think, am I right, just published this article in Rabble, on rabble.ca, and we're going to throw that up into the chat. And it's entitled "Reforms Won't Fix Policing and Anti-Black Racism." And I think it kind of picks up on where Syrus was talking about there. it so clearly addresses, when I was reading it, how the militarization of our police forces is creating these mixed messages for our publics. And you talk about how the widespread calls for protesters to abolish the police are so powerful. And you say, I'm going to quote you here, there's no crime. It's not because there is no crime, no disorder, or no killing in our society, but because, as it stands, the police in many ways are making things worse. And I thought that was such a clear articulation of a clear way to come back against some of those arguments that are out there that people are having. And I really appreciated that. And I know that both you and Syrus have been working inside of the abolitionist politics. And I wondered if you could kind of tell us where that fits into right now, this whole conversation.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think more and more people are realizing this status quo doesn't work, right? This isn't working. We're in that moment that Syrus is talking about, that you were talking about. And this has a long history, right? This has a long history of abolitionist struggle that goes back, a long, long time, but really started to gain momentum around, with Angela Davis and some of the Black scholarship that was kind of taking this idea that the master's tools cannot, take down the master's house, right? That we needed an entirely different way to imagine the world. And I think that's where we're really seeing that momentum starting to build. And so there's been this abolitionist struggle for a long time, particularly led by Black scholars, Black activists, Black community members in the US, that has been kind of engaging with some of the movements, the Indigenous-led movements in Canada around decolonizing. What does it mean to actually, transform into a situation where we're not reproducing colonialism again? So there was a convergence that was supposed to happen in May, and we put out a call for thinking about abolitionist and decolonizing futures. And initially we were thinking, like, people, Shiri Pasternak, Craig Fortier, we're starting to put out the call thinking we'll have 300 people. But like in the first basically 2 weeks the call came out, there were 300 proposals, each from multiple people, and some of them bringing like groups of sex workers wanting to think about community care, groups of folks thinking about, what does real mental health support look like, thinking about children's activities, thinking about real transformation. And so there's this hunger that I think is really manifesting in this moment. So even though this is an event, and when we talk about like eventful moments where things crack open and uncertainty is there on the ground, and uncertainty is there with the authorities, and they can't solve those problems of like put the lid back on very easily, right? There's an attempt right now to say body cameras are going to fix it, or increasing a particular sort of training mechanism is going to fix it. We're beyond that, right? The emperor has no clothes, and what are we going to do now, right? But there's been a lot of learning and a lot of experimenting for years, right? That we can build on, and we can start to say, okay, so what does work to make communities that are really healthy, right? That are nurturing, that allow all these different possibilities to flourish, because putting more money into the police, especially in a context where all these social services have been stripped away over the last 20 years, right, is not working. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about the world we want. One that, yeah, as Syrus was saying, puts Black, Indigenous folks in the center, people who, and COVID has taught us that, right? That if you don't take care of the most vulnerable people, your whole society is sick, right? Yeah. So it's an incredible opportunity for thinking forward on that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Olivia, so you've been front lines for many decades in our governance structures, and in some ways you could say you're the closest thing that we have is to an insider in the Toronto Police Services. You could bring your card forward if you want to at this moment, just to prove that was the case. In fact, I think you had to resign from the Toronto Police Services. Yes. So, and you've also been a real, I say clarion, a really clear voice in calling out of weak police oversight, lack of accountability, not just with the TPS, but when we were emailing exchanges talking about the RCMP as well. My goodness, just last night, Brenda Lucky decided, yep, nope. She first said, nope, no systemic racism. And then she went, oh, wait, you know what? Yes, systemic racism. So, it's like, Catch up, everybody, catch up. So what's going on? Where are the failings? What are you observing right now? What for you needs to change immediately?
The indigenous communities before colonization had at the heart of the justice system healing, education, reconciliation. And it's a collective approach. What do we have now? We have authoritative, militaristic, individualistic approach. So the entire culture and approach is wrong. And you add onto that a lot of things that don't belong to the police in terms of what they do, whether it is mental health calls, parking enforcements, policing road closure, all of those things. Like, come on. It really should be someone else, right? And also our society think about protection as something that should be funded by the states. Mayo, you see, and nurturing, whether it's long-term care workers, child care workers, educators, they are, it's really supposed to be a private business. The state really don't have much to do with it. So you see completely underfunding of nurturing and social workers, etc., and the complete over budgeting of the so-called protection budget. Right. So if you think about those theories and they're wrong, you need to be turned around. So there are a whole pile of things. We need mayors, councillors to put the right people on the police service board and provincial government, because they're the ones that put people on the police service board. And right now we're seeing lots of lip service, but really not a serious consideration what policing is really all about. And I come from a background, my dad had mental sickness. He's sometimes violent. I worked in a crisis intervention unit in the hospital. So I've seen people that are in complete distress. And I can see people being fearful around them. But, the last thing they need is someone yelling at them and, rather than just being able to be trained and do the counseling. So really policing shouldn't be there. So you need the right people to have the right vision. You need to really change the funding, right? So that it's the nurturing, it's the supportive housing and all those important things that provide service and support in our community. And then the third piece is you can't let police themselves. It doesn't work. So when wrongdoings occur, you need civilian control investigation. You need open and transparent investigation. Right now, whether it's the RCMP or whatever, they don't report to anybody. They just report to the commissioner. Commissioner sit on it, nothing happens. And at bare minimum, right now there's something called Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. It doesn't have any teeth, doesn't do a whole lot. So the entire RCMP needs to be reformed, and there needs to be, the culture needs to change also. And there's been myriads of reports, inquest recommendations of every kind. I can name them, but none of that, most of them, the recommendations hasn't been implemented. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, we need to really think through who is in control. Mm-hmm. Do they just pay lip service and use the right words and then do nothing and nothing ever change? Because it should change. And how do we move from fear to hope? And that's why I love Syrus, really hopeful. That is the end. It's now our turn. All right, let's do this. But we need to not allow these elected people to just talk. There's really lots of good lines, and every time I read another bloody report, I can just tear my hair out. So, call them to it. And if they're not doing it, throw them out. Elect people that actually will do the right thing.
Okay, fantastic. So I wanted to do this exercise with the three of you, and I keep kind of adjusting it as we go. But so we know that there has been calls for defunding of the police, and that those calls come out in different. Sometimes some people say 10%, and I kind of like what you said, Syrus, about the placating of reform, right? So this 10%, and at one point I was like, well, maybe it's 20%, and I was thinking 50%, So, but let's say that we could take $1.076 billion, which is the budget of the Toronto Police Services Board, which I don't know, like I didn't pay attention to that number before probably 2 weeks ago. And that's messed up. That is really messed up. And they're talking about hiring 300 more cops. So it goes on. But I want to know, where would you start? Where would you, if you had that money, and just green hat this, which means it's maybe a complete, not fully digested idea, but just play a bit, and you can even tag team each other if you want to. And like I'd love to say, where tomorrow, where we'll be putting that money immediately. And you can talk on top of each other if that's even possible. I don't know, but we'll try.
Call us.
Okay, I'll call you guys out. Okay. Syrus, where would you start?
Okay, well, first of all, I just would say that we would absolutely be coming for that full 100%. We're not coming for 75. We're not coming for 25. We're coming for 100% because Black people's lives depend on it. Indigenous people's lives depend on it. Mad people's lives depend on it. So that's what I would say, first of all. I think that, Vivian Salahana, Dr. Vivian Salahana speaks so beautifully about why we should not have to prove that abolition is a viable solution in order to get it, because we are literally, as Nina Simone said, they're killing us one by one. Don't forget that. Right? That we somehow are put in a position, Vivian Salahana describes it like an abusive relationship. We're put in the position of having to prove that we can figure it all out in order to justify getting out of this violence of white supremacy and the police and prison state. So just to say that. But if you had to, if you really needed to hear and think of solutions, I mean, we should just be investing in the communities that are already doing the work. There are already communities organizing, building abolitionist societies. There are community care collectives. There are mutual aid circles. There are community centers. There are spaces for people to gather. There are campaigns, that people are organizing to ensure that there's a safe supply of drugs, that there's a decriminalizing of the way that we live our lives, like decriminalizing sex work, decriminalizing HIV. I would begin by giving this money back to our communities and start ticking off what's at the top of their lists of what they think the priorities are, what they think is important to happen in the communities. And then, I would make sure that once that money was spent, once that money was allocated, I would say, okay, what is left? What vestiges are left of the prison industrial complex once we've taken all of this money away? What is left? And then we're going to come for that last bit, because we're not going to stay until all of the walls have fallen, until all of the doors have been opened, until all of the cages have been unlocked. Black trans woman, CC McDonald, activist, organizer, ex-prisoner, she said, you can't reform policing and prisons because that's like trying to reform racism. There is no better form of racism. You have to abolish it. So taking the money and defunding is a strategy that is part of a larger move towards abolition of all carceral spaces, including psychiatric detention and other spaces like that. So anyways, we're gonna do what we can. And if you gave us that money, we'd put it back in the community and they would do beautiful things with it.
Mm-hmm. I know of young people that said, hire us to teach the 12-year-old, the 9-year-old after school activities because, mom and dad might be working, and we could teach them arts, sports, arts and craft, all of that stuff, and earn a credit and have decent dollar amount, lots of recreation activities right in the communities, food for kids. So no in school. Every kid should have a decent meal in school, in community center, in a child care center. We should have supportive housing so people don't have to be living on the street. We need to have, rather than a huge, long mental health counseling support service wait list, we need that right in the community, not in some institution, community support. And I think also decent childcare for folks, right? And those are things that we've been talking about for 30 years, for heaven's sake. And one other part, I think, is that those of us that live in urban centers, if we have some of the funds, we could go out to the wilderness and really get connected. But a lot of kids don't have that opportunity. And it would be so amazing. And there's fewer and fewer opportunities. So it would be amazing if we make our wilderness or parks really, really accessible. And there's tons, as Syrus said, tons and tons of programs out there. And they just need some support. And by the way, while we're at it, we need to pay those people that are in the community. They are the fabric that support everyone. And they are stressed out because they don't have enough funds, okay? They're barely making it. For God's sake, pay them a bit more. I mean, a cop can make $100,000 easily in Toronto. Childcare workers, personal support workers, $15, $17, maybe $20 if you're lucky. My God. And that's what, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000? You can't live in a big city in such a low income. But anyway, I'll stop ranting. Lots of places you can really find.
Yeah, I mean, it's I was thinking more in the box than I should have been when I was thinking about this question, and I was thinking, okay, so well, how do we decide between long-term care and libraries and community centers and sports? But I think, in order we need to kind of get beyond to where I guess Iris is talking about. It's like, okay, what does the community need? And Olivia as well, what does the community need? What is the vision that we want that's going to be, healing to the planet, to the communities, that's not one size fits all? It doesn't mean remaking the wheel. I personally love, libraries. I want more of them, right? So, but recognizing that some of the public institutions we have, we need to really strengthen those. And we also need this mutual aid stuff that's been really, really flourishing during the period of COVID. Let's recognize that sort of strength, the webs that actually hold this city together, and allow people to move around. I'm like, transit, right? Actually accessible transit, please.
We have to move for neighborhood.
We have a lot to do.
Yeah, there's neighborhood budgeting. So rather than us 3 or 4 of us deciding, get the parliament, let the community, let the neighborhood decide. Yeah. Let them have some control over their funds. It's their money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I was more, I want to hear what was cooking for each of you, And then one thing, we had a really interesting conversation this afternoon in another panel is about universal basic income. Right? We've had this, what was really kind of striking for us is that, they were able to roll out CERB so quickly, despite supposedly the bureaucratic things. And it has changed a significant amount of artists' experiences right now, that's for sure. And I'm sure other people as well. So,
we absolutely need a universal basic income. I mean, if anything that this pandemic has shown us is the need for a universal basic income. And I think that, one of the things that people are sort of, I think, hopefully will push for is to say, actually, these benefits aren't going to end. If you can find $1 trillion a day to pump into the stock market to make sure that this inflated, fictitious system stays afloat, you can find money for a universal basic income. You can do this.
Well, that's it. This is a moment of bravery, right? An opportunity on some level. There's been this kind of clearing of homeless encampments in the city because people don't want to go into dangerous homeless shelters right now. And so there's been this whole network of people who've been going and saying, no, you can't just bulldoze somebody's stuff and make them go back to a shelter. They need an apartment. They need a secure place to live. And in this moment, they've been getting them, right? We've been getting a lot of space, a lot of victories, because there's all of a sudden of holy shit, this is a sorry, I swore, crisis that we need, to actually think bigger.
And Asada, she said that, right? She said we had to believe that we could win. And I feel like these little wins, this is what it feels like. This is the wins are starting to accumulate. And I think, seeing the decarceration of folks because of COVID from prison and carceral spaces was a win, and as these things start to snowball, we can build some confidence in this and I think get more people who maybe weren't yet on board. And that feels like a really exciting possibility.
Absolutely. There's a demonstration tomorrow around migrant workers, right? There's outbreaks on migrant workers. Why are we not protecting migrant workers who are like getting the food that we all survive on, right? So put that in the chat.
Yeah. So absolutely. Please, Allison, who is ever on that. So I'm not trying to be a downer here, but like Minneapolis, their city council came forward and said, hey, overwhelmingly, we're going to start the defunding. We're going to go for it. Just yesterday, I read in the New York Times about how already it's getting caught in the grind of partisan, battlegrounds, and it made me all of a sudden I felt this kind of deflation a little bit. And so, how do we galvanize our forces to ensure that it doesn't just fall off the news cycle, that we take this opportunity, we seize it, and we move it forward, we move the dial forward in a significant, meaningful way. What would your strategies be, each of you?
Maybe because I'm probably the oldest of all of you, and I've seen waves, the Yonge Street riot in Toronto, and there was Stephen Lewis had a report. It was amazing, talking about anti-Black violence and racism, and everything in there is just like, in terms of recommendations, were perfect, and then nothing got done, right? So I think what we need to do is, as think big, dream big, okay, stay hopeful, but then fight every inch of the way in the most practical way. Okay, who are you going to put as the police service board chair? Okay, in, say, Toronto. Who are you putting as RCMP commission? Okay, that's the federal level. And are you going to do the RCMP Reform Act? When are you going to, whatever you want to call it, civilian control, accountability, whatever you call it. Last time we did anything was 2013, okay? Nothing meaningful. So when are you doing it? When would it be done? And excuse me, stop just giving those words about reconciliation or all these fancy anti-racism, blah, 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 blah. And timetable. Who's doing it? What are you doing? When are you going to get it done? And don't let people get away with it. And be really clear. We need to know clearly who is on the police service board, who is in charge, who's the mayor, like, is it happening in Parliament? So yes, think big, but let us empower those people to say to them, every few years, these guys, so-called, the politician, I'm a recovering one, come to your door and ask you for support, and chuck them out if they just do nothing, right? And so I think it's both. You organize on the ground, empower people so that they can take control. They can say to the people that they elect to say, no more BS, do this or else you're out. And often we don't do that level to really squeeze it, because we stay on the, so we need both, right? On the ground and big thinking, very practical, small things.
Yeah.
And
no,
I think,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Lesley.
Okay, I was just gonna, like, one of my favorite framings of, and it kind of builds on what you're saying, Olivia, is Chris Dixon talks about within, against, and beyond, right? We're within a particular moment and a particular system. We're against it, and we always have to be thinking beyond it. And so we need different sections of communities and movements to be able to work on those different pieces. We don't all have to do the same thing at the same time, but we have to build relationships with them.
Yeah, and the system, I mean, this is the thing, right? Is that the state, the system as it's currently working, it's not broken, so it can't be fixed. It's a system that's designed to work the way that it currently does. It's not going to go down without a fight, right? It is going to fight like hell to maintain its status quo, its homeostasis, it's quit. It's just going to try to maintain that. And I think that what we're seeing now is this backlash of the state trying to be like, wait a minute, but the ground is shifting beneath us as we sleep, every day I wake up, there's a different chorus of voices calling for abolition, coming from the most unlikely of sources. So I think that the ground has changed, the playing turf has changed, and the state is a little unsettled, and I think that now is a time to push harder than we've ever pushed before.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'm really intrigued. I'm going to try and squeeze in another one before we get to our final question here. The autonomous zone that exists, and forgive me, I think is it Oakland? No, is it in Oakland or is it in Seattle? Do you guys, anybody know what I'm talking about here? Maybe someone in our notes will have it. It's rats, and I did my research here, as an autonomous zone where it's been sanctioned by the mayor and the governor, and as a zone that's a no policing zone. And I part of me wonders if we need to grab a piece of Toronto and just mark. Okay, great, got my thing. So anyway, I'll just kind of plant that little seed of an imaginative idea in there and see what happens. And if any of my kind of researchers on the side can able to pull that up and throw it in the chat, that would be great. Okay, let's move to our last question. Syrus, you recently shared on the Folda site a really beautiful letter, a story, I would say, from to 2020 from the perspective of 2078. So the idea of 48, 50 years down the road. And you reflect on everything that's sort of going to be happening to us right now and how it kind of unfolds. You do this beautiful imaginative landscape of how COVID unfolds, what happens to the economy, how the trees grow over and over. It's gorgeous, and we'll throw a link onto that too. So what I would love to do is have each of you, predict if you wish, or not predict. Bring your aspirations again more forward. You can get more granular if you want. You can radiate them outwards if you want. For literally just for the coming months, for the next year, for the 5 years, I want to sort of just leave it with you. And I'll start with you again, Olivia, if you wouldn't mind.
Wow. At that time, every dollar that we are using now to subsidize the oil and gas industry are brought back to the community, especially the indigenous community. They now own their land and their water and their trees, just like most of Haida Gwaii, the Haida Nation. And that's not happening here now. They own the land, they own the fish and the trees. And that they would have incredible housing, and the young people live in hope and vibrant and culture. And then we all come together, desegregated, because right now in our little city of Toronto, there's a U shape. It's very segregated: rich, poor, racialized, non-racialized. It's desegregated because there's a massive transfer of funds from protection to nurturing, and that the community have control over their funding so that they are more civically engaged, they're less alienated, they have a richer life, work fewer hours so they can be more creative, they could appreciate the art, they can do things because they don't have to work all the time. And that there's real environmental sustainability because we no longer subsidize oil and gas industry and we're keeping the oil underground, the fossil fuel underground. And that the gap between rich and poor is tiny. and people have much happier life. And we celebrate the generosity of spirit as what we see now in a lot of the community supporting each other. That would be my vision of what is possible. And no kid would go to bed hungry. Wow. Can you imagine that?
Thank you. Thanks, Olivia. Lesley.
I share your vision. Olivia, it makes me misty. When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about some of the chants in the demonstrations that we see, not another Black life, not one more Indigenous child, no more homeless deaths, leave it in the ground. All of those things are possible right now. 5 years, by then, I think we would have made those changes in terms of redirecting the funding in material ways to allow things to flourish. We'd be truly on the way to abolishing the police and in the meantime, having real accountability, right? Real accountability. And building the power in our communities so that 10 years from now, the kids who are calling out my generation will be taking the lead, and in 50 years, it'll seem like a bad dream. And we'll be where you were speaking about, I think we can do it. We have to do it. There's no choice.
Mm-hmm. What will the university look like? That to you too, Syrus.
Won't be all online.
We'd have free education, and we learn
free education.
Reciprocal learning in the community.
Yes, it'll be everywhere.
Yeah,
and it won't just be about credentials, and it won't be based on a medieval German institution.
Meritocracy, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
But real research will be done into how to make things work more effectively for the good of the larger, planet and people on it.
An activist scholarship will just be the scholarship. They won't even have to call it activist scholarship because it will just be what scholarship is. Exactly. It'll be rooted in activist principles and based in supporting community initiatives. It'll be a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Activism is baseline values, a shared baseline value of everybody. We know we need to take action in order to be accountable for our own communities, right? Syrus, why don't you pick it up there and keep going?
Okay, well, I think, in this future world that we're imagining, I think I would draw on Giselle Diaz, Indigenous scholar and activist and longtime abolitionist, her framing where she said, if we had Indigenous resurgence, we would have abolition. So we'd be living in a world where there was Indigenous resurgence, where Indigenous people had their Turtle Island was back to Indigenous people. And as a result, we were living in an abolitionist society. We'd be living in a world where Black lives actually mattered. And as a result, we'd be living in an abolitionist society. We'd be living in a world where trans people would get to grow old and become elders, which is something that is taken for granted and not guaranteed. We don't get to live long enough to become elders in our current timeline, but in the future, that will be different. And ultimately, in this future, we would be free. We would be responsible to each other. We would take care of each other. Right now, we're on the precipice of a new world. We've been fighting to get to today. Our ancestors were fighting to get to today. We are right now very close to abolition in our lifetime. We can finally finish this project, this unfinished project of abolishing slavery, as Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore tells us. We can finish the project and finally let our ancestors rest. We can end the violence that is directed towards Black and Indigenous people, that has been directed towards Black and Indigenous people since the start of colonizing Turtle Island. We can end all of this. We can also end race capitalism. We can create an accessible future where mad, sick, and disabled people thrive and have everything that they need to live. We can have a world where we all get to survive and thrive together. And the only thing that is keeping us from that future, the only thing that we have to do to get there is to take the conceptual leap that caging people does not solve harm, and that it does not reduce conflict, and it does not support people in crisis. Police do not reduce conflict, they do not solve harm, and they do not respond well to crisis. We can agree together to this reality and start building and imagining something different, something better. Policing is only a recent invention in human history, and all we have to do is just let it go. We just have to let it go and build something new together for ourselves, but also for our great-grandchildren, so that they can finally be born free, which is what our ancestors have been fighting for generations.
Thank you. Thank you. What I love lots of everything that people are saying here. Something you said there that I just want to tease out, Syrus, is this idea is that we have to be able to share this conceptualization of it. That's our mission, is to get this image of a different place and a different way of being, and kind of wrench this sort of the status quo out of the imagination of the publics and get them to start seeing something different, because that's where sort of belief, and that's where we'll actually be able to kind of collectively and collaboratively actually start to really change things, right? Make shift. I keep thinking of this massive cruise ship. It's not a cruise ship, but this massive boat that just has to kind of go and change, and yet it is moving. That's the exciting part. We can actually see and feel it moving right now. So great. Any last words from any of you before?
I would just say that while that ship is turning, while it was doing that process of slowly turning, behind the scenes, we've been building an entire ocean full of other boats. So, no matter what, we are going to survive as a community. We are going to thrive. We don't need the system the way that it is. We can build something better, and we already have been. We're so close.
Mm-hmm. I think this is where art comes in, the imagination. That's what's possible, because it can lift up our spirit. It can touch our soul. It can make people be more courageous and braver, because if we don't have imagination, what else do we have? So, Christine, or part, you are, Syrus, those of you that are artists, that's what we need to do. More art.
More art, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm just going to check with the people, the Luminata people in the background there. 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes. We got time. That's what COVID has given us, right? Is time. So let's use it. There has to be more burning thoughts here. I kind of love this image, Syrus, like you say, that there's boats behind it. I'm thinking, well, maybe we just need to sink this big ship then, actually sink it, or just
I mean, if you're asking me, I actually do think it's time for us to get in a different boat. I actually feel like we've been the storm is rocking us, and the boat has holes. I mean, Miss Major says that, lots of people have the umbrella has holes in it, and we're getting wet. So like, it's time to get in a different boat. I actually think it is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And while we're doing that, keep an eye on who, while we get on different boat, maybe we need different captains.
Yeah.
We could be captains too. Some of you that are on the street, that have the vision, the artists, right? They need to be the captains, so they need to be elected. So don't just leave those people that govern us to them guys, and mostly boys, white boys. Okay, so there needs to be taking of good control, becoming the captain, be the one that actually running the ship, or else we will always rely on wrong people.
The same old. It's true. That's so true.
We'll keep snapping back to the thing that we know, right, as opposed to going to the thing that we are imagining. Lesley, do you have any ideas?
No. Now I'm just thinking about being on a boat.
Well, this is it, is that, you know what, some of our activism is changing because of COVID. That's the whole focus of this panel, right? We have to think creatively about how we do it, because we can't all gather in a group. We can't always be marching in the streets because it's just not safe right now. So let's get in a boat. Let's figure a way. Well, we could do some creative activisms around the water for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we've been learning a lot about, is listening to the water and respecting the water, right? Over the last few years.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Listening inside of that. Yeah. Great. Thank you, you three. This is
Thank you, Christine.
Oh, well, I was really neat. I met Lesley 2.5 years ago. I guess kept haranguing her via email saying, Lesley, I'm going to this play, blah, 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 blah. Can you talk to me? One day, I think you finally decided you got it. It's the university email mountain. You answered me. And then Syrus, we got to chat. We got to meet with the Bentway. And then Olivia, I got to meet you last summer. So I feel, again, immense gratitude for leadership, your visions, your generosity, and your courage, and you're holding that light forth for us. So thank you so much. We're about to say goodbye. And thank you to everyone who attended today's session. Let us know what you think.